Rwanda is a family again. These words from President Paul Kagame at the end of a long day marking the 25th anniversary of the genocide that killed 800,000 people. Libya's eastern forces launched their first airstrike on Tripoli, despite international pressure to cease fire. The UN-backed government says 11 people have been killed in fighting. And thousands of Sudanese demonstrators hold a sit-in for a second day outside the president's residence in the capital, Khartoum. They want President Omar al-Bashir to step down. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Anka Ula. Thank you for joining us again. 25 years after the Rwandan genocide wiped out 1/10 of the nation's population, mostly members of the Tutsi ethnic minority group, the nation is trying to move forward. President Paul Kagame, who is credited with leading the rebel force that ended the genocide, said Rwandans would never turn on each other again. On Sunday, 100 days of national mourning were kicked off with a series of commemorative events. Shirley Sitbom has the story.
A huge flame in the sky of Kigali and hundreds of small ones in memory of the 800,000 men, women, and children killed in the genocide. The vast majority were Tutsis. 70% of that minority were killed. Moderate Hutus were also murdered. In this stadium in 1994, UN personnel gathered Tutsis, trying to protect them from the killers outside.
This history will not repeat. That is our firm commitment. Every day we learn to forgive, but we do not want to forget.
Sunday's commemoration started at this memorial, where 250,000 victims are buried. About 10 foreign leaders joined the thousands of Rwandan mourners, among them only one European leader, Belgian Charles Michel. He noted that world powers were also to blame.
It has to be said, the Rwandan genocide also represents a failure by the international community which could not prevent it, could not bar it from happening. It could not stop this crime against humanity.
Rwandan authorities have gone further, accusing France of supporting the Hutu forces. President Emmanuel Macron said last week that a probe will determine what exactly happened.
Well, to North Africa, Libya's health ministry says 11 people have died in clashes in the south of the capital, and nearly 24 are injured. Despite international calls for peace, Libya's eastern forces carried out their first air raid in the capital, Tripoli, on Sunday, while the internationally recognized unity government launched its counteroffensive. As the window for a UN ceasefire passed, there are no signs of violence letting up.
Men sent to the front line, armored vehicles on their way to Tripoli. Libya's eastern forces and their leader Khalifa Haftar are showing their intent to take over the Libyan capital and overthrow the government backed by the UN. The so-called Libyan National Army, or LNA, aligned with authorities in eastern Libya, says they carried out a first air raid on Sunday morning. They say they're holding the international airport. But is that really the situation on the ground? Not according to their rivals, the Government of National Accord, based in Tripoli and recognized by the UN. They claim the eastern forces have exaggerated their gains, and they have triggered their own operation to push their rivals back.
Today, the Libyan armed forces are announcing the beginning of the Volcano of Anger operation. Its goal is to clean out Libyan cities, purify them from aggressors who are against the legitimate power.
Tripoli government forces are not alone in that fight against the LNA. Militias backing them have been deployed near the capital. The UN has called again to restore peace and on all sides to respect a 2-hour ceasefire to evacuate civilians and those wounded. But warring sides did not commit to the truce, nor did they implement it. The UN fears to see the fighting expand into an all-out war.
Protesters in Sudan are holding a sit-in for a second day outside the army headquarters in central Khartoum, where President Omar al-Bashir also lives. Thousands camped outside the compound overnight, demanding Bashir's resignation and that the army take their side. Julia Kim has more.
Chanting for a revolution. Crowds of anti-government protesters call on the army to join their movement. Since Saturday, thousands have amassed outside the presidential compound in Khartoum, which also houses the defense ministry and the army's headquarters. The date, April 6th, was chosen to mark the 34th anniversary of the uprising that toppled then-President Jafar Nimeri, overthrown with the army's help. For the first time since the start of the rallies in December, thousands of people managed to take their protest to President Omar al-Bashir's doorstep. Tear gas was fired at anti-government protesters by Sudanese police, but it did little to deter demonstrators. Answering the call of opposition leader Sadiq al-Mahdi, they're demanding the resignation of Omar al-Bashir, in power since 1989. Al-Mahdi on Friday issued an ultimatum to the veteran leader from the neighboring city of Omdurman.
I call on President Bashir to resign, dissolve all constitutional institutions, and form a 25-member council to govern the country.
What began as a protest in the capital over the government's decision to triple the price of bread last December rapidly escalated into a nationwide movement opposing Omar al-Bashir. But since the declaration of a state of emergency on the 22nd of February, anti-government protesters have been violently quelled. Officials say some 30 people have been killed, but Human Rights Watch says the figure is closer to 51, and that the victims include children and medics.
Saudi Arabia's press agency says the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen has intercepted and destroyed a drone launched at Asir city in Saudi Arabia. The SPA said the drone was launched by the Iran-allied Houthi movement in Yemen and that no injuries or damage were reported. Next, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Twitter that Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen has left her position. Nielsen was the face of Trump's immigration policy, particularly the much-criticized practice of separating migrant children from their families at the border. Her departure comes after weeks of growing frustration with a number of Central American families crossing the border.
The latest high-profile departure from Donald Trump's administration. Kirstjen Nielsen had been the frontline defender of the president's controversial immigration policies. She'd signed on at the start of his presidency and headed the Homeland Security Agency for the past 18 months, during which time she became synonymous with the controversial policy of separating migrant children from their parents. This made her a frequent target of the Democratic opposition and progressive groups. But despite her steadfast loyalty, Trump is reported to have questioned her ability to do the job and blamed her for a recent surge in migrants crossing the border. Publicly, however, he thanked Nielsen for her service, as he announced the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, Kevin McAleenan, will replace her as the acting secretary. The change at the top of Homeland Security comes just days after Trump and Nielsen visited the Mexico border, where he appears to be hardening his position on migrants still further.
The system is full, and when it's full, there's nothing you can do. You have to say, I'm sorry, we can't take you.
Immigration and building the border wall is widely expected to be at the forefront of Donald Trump's campaign for re-election in 2020.
To Turkey, after the biggest electoral setback in more than a decade of rule, the country's AKP party wants to see the receipts. The party's vice president asked for a recount of all ballots cast in the economic capital, Istanbul, where initial results showed the AKP narrowly lost general elections last week. The party already appealed losses in the district of the capital, Ankara, and in Istanbul, where recounts are taking place for invalid ballots. France 24's Shona Bhattacharya reports.
This is one of the centers where Istanbul's 300,000 invalid ballots are being recounted as allowed by a 2016 law. AK Party and CHP supporters are keeping a close eye on the process. They've been separated after physical attacks from AK Party voters.
I'm waiting for the announcement of the AK Party's victory, God willing.
You think you will win? God willing, this is an injustice.
What channel are you?
A French channel. Do you want to talk?
No, I don't think so.
We've been waiting for a week. They have to accept it. When there's a winner, there's a loser.
The Electoral Commission agreed to a recount after a complaint from the ruling AK party. Preliminary results showed the CHP candidate with a slim lead, a lead that's now down to just over 16,000 votes, with 80% of invalid ballots recounted. Still, Ekrem İmamoğlu remains confident.
Do you believe that you will be mayor of Istanbul?
Yes. Actually, yes.
I can see they're trying to buy time. For Turkish democracy's sake, the Election Commission cannot accept new demands. It would create a bad precedent.
The AK party is now asking the Electoral Commission for all mayoral ballots in 38 of Istanbul's 39 districts to be recounted. The race to win Istanbul is likely far from over.
Well, finally, ahead of Israel's general election, Benjamin Netanyahu has been rallying his nationalist base as he seeks a record 5th term as prime minister. He faces stiff competition from the newly formed Blue and White Party, led by former Army Chief Benny Gantz. But even if Gantz beats Netanyahu at the ballot box, he's far behind the incumbent when it comes to political allies. Alexander Alcott takes a look now at Netanyahu's campaign.
You might expect a prime minister who's been in office for such a long time and touched by scandal to be deeply unpopular. But to his many supporters, the man they affectionately call Bibi is irreplaceable.
Bibi. Bibi and no one else. He's the best.
Seeking his 5th term as prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu has put the focus on his status as a statesman, with visits to remind people of his close ties with Donald Trump and also with Vladimir Putin. He also hosted the Brazilian leader Jair Bolsonaro, with whom he spoke to one of the nation's biggest footballers, Neymar.
Jerusalem waits for you.
Hello, Bibi and Bolsonaro. Thanks for inviting us.
The constant publicity stunts have dominated the media coverage at a time when Netanyahu is facing 3 criminal investigations for fraud, bribery and breach of trust. Allegations the Israeli Prime Minister has brushed off as fake news, cooked up by the left wing.
There you have it. That's all I can do in the kitchen. But you know what my opponents are cooking up? A left-wing government. Backed by the Arab MPs, they are really mocking you.
With viral videos like this, he's been able to dictate the rhythm of the campaign. His only true rival is Benny Gantz, the former Chief of General Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, who entered the race 4 months ago, saying Netanyahu's time is up. But the incumbent has hit back with this campaign ad, showing other candidates trying to get into a party by dressing as him. The message: they all want to be me, but they're fooling no one.
That's all the time we have for this edition, but if you want to dive deeper into any of our top stories, please head to our website, www.france24.com. Available in 4 languages: French, English, Arabic, and Spanish. Our top story currently, the crisis in Libya. Otherwise, do stay tuned. There is much more news coming up here on France 24. Stay with us.